fans, welcome back to another video on this little corner of the internet. If you're new here, hi, my name is Lillian and I like to talk about books on this channel. And today I wanted to talk about 23 classics that I would really like to get to in 2023. These are all in addition to the books that I mentioned in the next 5 classics that I really need to read video that I posted. But a good chunk of these are classics that I've had on my shelf for many years at this point, and I am taking a stand. I am telling myself that, okay, you need to read these. It's been enough time. And with that, let's jump into the meat of this video. The first book that I'm going to mention, I think I might need to expose myself a little bit for how long I've had this one on my shelf. I think it's been since 2010, 2011, so 10 plus years. And that is Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I was looking through my personal Instagram the other day, just scrolling back to when I started it back in high school. There was a very heavily filtered Instagram post, I think from 2011, 2012, where I was packing a suitcase to go on a trip, and I think this was one of the books that was laid out. And that post was from 2011, and I'm pretty sure I'd had the book for a little bit before going on that trip. I really tend to adore the Latin American magical realist authors that I have read. I loved 100 Years of Solitude by Marquez. I adore Isabel Allende. Water for Chocolate was also one that I read, I think early undergrad or late high school, I can't quite remember, but adored that one as well. So I have no doubt that I will actually really enjoy this book when I eventually get to it this year. I'm getting to it this year. But I haven't picked it up in the 10 plus years that I've had it, and I still really want to read it, so 2023 is the year. The summary of this book says that it is the story of Florentino and Fermina, who fall in love in their youth, but Fermina decides to marry a wealthy doctor instead, and so heartbroken, Florentino decides to wait for her for 50 years. And so he is showing up at her husband's funeral to once again declare his love for her. Next on the list is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This will be my first Edith Wharton. This won the Pulitzer Prize when it was published in 1921, which was the 4th year that the prize had been running for, and Edith Wharton was the first woman to win the prize. It sounds like it's a book that focuses on New York high society in the 1870s, and the protagonist is a man that is torn between his duty to society and his desire for this woman who he's fallen in love with but who society does not deem acceptable. I watched a video recently where Shelly was raving about Edith Wharton. Wharton is definitely an author that I've been meaning to get to, but I think Shelly definitely gave me that little spark to check her out a little bit sooner. Next, I would really like to read Victory by Joseph Conrad. I read Heart of Darkness by him, I think in my 11th grade English class in high school, which at the time I found to be a really interesting and challenging but rewarding experience to read that book. I think it really helped that I read it within a classroom setting and really got to discuss it with others as well as a teacher. I don't think I would have gotten as much out of it at the time if I had read it on my own, just because Conrad's use of language is very ornate and complex. So I think we're supposed to read like 10 pages a night. And it's a very short book. But nonetheless, I picked up Victory by Joseph Conrad, I think in college, having read Heart of Darkness, and thought, hey, I might as well pick up another book by this author. Honestly, I don't know very much about the plot of this book, and I think I'm gonna keep it that way and go in blind and see what happens. Next, I'm planning to read the behemoth that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. Both Grace and Shelly have been reading this recently and talking about it on their channels, and are both singing its praises. So I'm taking that as the motivation that I think I need in order to face this tome of a book. This is reputedly a masterpiece in realist fiction. It's the story that follows a fictional 19th century town in the UK Midlands as it is facing a lot of changes due to the modern world. It sounds like we follow a cast of characters who are in the midst of their little small town dramas and the choices that they make as a result. Number 5 on this list is Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. I almost wrote my undergrad thesis on this and Vera Brittain, which in the end didn't end up happening, and fast forward several years at this point and I still haven't read it. Which, as someone who studied and wrote extensively about women and World War I and their experience, having not read this makes me feel a little bit like a fraud. For those who don't know, I think that Testament of Youth stands as one of the most widely read and long-standing bits of memoir about someone's experience in the First World War, and definitely shaped people's perceptions and memory of the war itself in the decades after it was published. So Vera Brittain left her studies at the University of Oxford in 1915 in order to enlist as a nurse in the British Armed Forces. Testament of Youth is her memoir of looking back on that experience, the things that she went through, her experience of being a nurse on the front lines, and very tragically losing the majority of her male friends who had enlisted or had been conscripted, including her younger brother as well as her fiance. I know that this is likely not going to be a very cheery read, but I feel like it is high time that I get to it. Next on the list is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which is yet another book that I bought myself in college and has been sitting on my shelf and I haven't read it yet. I think I actually remember buying this for myself as a present for getting through the first year of college. I bought myself the cloth-bound Penguin Classics edition of it as a little treat. And yet here we are 8 years later, which, God, it's been 8 years. Time is not real, if you're wondering. Time is not real. This book has one of the most iconic opening lines that I think a good number of people can probably recite off the top of their head, whether or not they have actually read the book. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Which, that and knowing that it's about the French Revolution are pretty much all that I know about this book. I've had 2 hits and a miss when reading Dickens, so I'm excited to see what this one is all about and see where I land with it. Next, I'm very excited about reading Giovannis Room by James Baldwin this year. This might very well end up being my first Baldwin if I don't end up reading If Beale Street Could Talk first. I've really been chomping at the bit to get to my first Baldwin. I haven't read any of him yet. I've watched several of Baldwin's interviews and I'm always absolutely floored by his mastery of language, and he's just off the cuff talking to another person. So I am really excited about getting to finally meet him on the page and seeing what he does there. This is an absolutely iconic piece of queer literature that came out in the 1950s, and our protagonist is a man who is struggling with his sexuality. Number 8 on this list is Light in August by William Faulkner, and I think I'm starting to see a pattern in the list that I made of a lot of these books are ones that I bought for myself either in high school or in college and have yet to read. And perhaps an upside of making this TBR in this video, I will be holding myself accountable and actually getting to them finally. Like I said, I picked this up in high school having heard Faulkner's name mentioned. He was never part of my assigned reading in school, so this would be my first encounter with him. Light in August apparently has some of his most memorable characters. Do I know what happens plot-wise? No. But I am going to venture a guess that the story itself is going to be haunting and a little bit messed up, just based on what I've heard about Faulkner as a writer. I'm really looking forward to finally getting to The Awakening by Kate Chopin this year. Chopin? This is a mainstay of feminist classic literature, or if we're going to be technical, proto-feminist literature. This book really shocked audiences when it initially came out in 1899 for its frank and honest portrayal of a woman who cheats on her husband. While cheating isn't necessarily seen as quite a scandalous topic as it probably was in the late Victorian period when this was written, I've heard that A, this still stands as a really interesting psychological look into the mind of the woman who has the affair, B, it's apparently beautifully written, and C, it set the precedent for Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence that was written in the 1920s, which, speak of the devil, is the next book on this list of classics that I want to get to. This originally came out in 1928, and to say that it caused a stir, I think would be an understatement. This book is in a very similar vein to The Awakening, and D.H. Lawrence tells the story of an upper-class woman having an affair, which in this case was sanctioned by her husband, which, shock. And not only does she, an upper-class woman, have an affair with a working-class man, which, scandalous, she actually enjoys the sex, which many people in the 1920s saw as incredibly scandalous and immediately banned the book. I think another reason why this book was immediately banned is, one, the lady is having an affair, but two, she doesn't come to a very tragic demise, and therefore it can be spun as a moral tale for young women. So this definitely caused an uproar when it was initially published in 1928 and was banned in most places as pornography until about the 1960s. The next classic on this list is Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky. She's giving a brooding loner who feels alienated by society at large, who's searching for the true and good in a world that has relative values and few absolutes. I've definitely been wanting to delve into pre-revolution Russian literature, and I feel like this small volume by Dostoevsky will be a great way to initially dip my toe into that world. The next book on this list is one that I actually currently have checked out from the library, and that is Abigail by Magda Szabó. I've really been meaning to read more Hungarian literature in the last several years. I studied abroad in Budapest for a semester and fell in love with the city, fell in love with the country. I've seen a number of folks picking up this author's book, The Door, recently, which is also definitely on my list. Abigail is the headstrong daughter of a widowed general in the Hungarian army who sends her away to a boarding school in the countryside as the country faces the Second World War. And knowing how Hungary fared during the Second World War, I'm really interested to see how the author plays with this and what she ends up exploring in this book, especially because this came out in the 1970s under the Hungarian Communist Party. The next book on the list is a reread for me, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. I read this many years ago for the first time as a sophomore in high school, and I remember a few vague plot points here and there, but overall I don't remember much from this book. But I really wanted to revisit it as an adult, knowing that now I would have a much greater appreciation for it, as someone who can say with certainty that I am very much more politically aware than I was at age 14. Number 14 on this list is A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. This was written 60 years after the plague swept through London in 1665. This book was originally published in 1722, which, now that I think about it, I don't think I've read many books from around this time period, so I'll be interested to see how this goes. This is Defoe's fictionalized account of a year during the plague in London. I think it'll be a really interesting experience reading this book at a point in the modern world where I feel like the vast majority of us have a bit of a touchstone for an experience like this, but set in a historic context and written by someone from a very different time period. But I'll be interested to see what parallels come from the text that I can relate to my own experience. Next, I'm really looking forward to reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I feel like this is the du Maurier that people talk about reading. I've also heard from many people that this is one of their absolute favorite classics or absolute favorite books, period. And surprisingly, I've actually managed to avoid the majority, if not all, discussion of the actual plot of this book, which I think might actually be of service to me. I think I'm gonna prefer to go in blind with this one as well. I read Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier a few years ago, after watching the BBC miniseries adaptation of it. And while I liked the book, I think this is the only time I can say this, I prefer the screen adaptation to the book, which I know, shock, horror. And I think one of the things that contributed to that is the performance given by the actor who plays the innkeeper in the screen adaptation. Is probably one of the best acting performances I think I've ever seen in my life. And after watching it, I looked up that actor, and turns out he hasn't been in many TV or movies, but he does a lot of stage acting. Was really, really blown away by his performance and was genuinely terrified of him as a character. And I didn't get quite the same impact with that same character on the page, so I will definitely be interested to see how I end up getting along with Rebecca. Number 16 on this list is The Complete Claudine by Colette. I watched the biopic movie Colette when it came out in 2018, starring Keira Knightley. I really enjoyed the movie. I adored the costumes in this movie, oh my goodness. And just based on this film and knowing that it was based on a real-life person, I was really interested in actually exploring this author's work. Colette herself was a pretty out-there female writer for her day. She was also, in addition to being a writer, a mime, an actress, and a journalist. She had frequent and several long-standing relationships with women, as well as being married to men several times. And she also wrote frequently about women's independence in male society, which I'm really interested to explore. The next classic on this TBR is another classic of queer literature, and that is The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith, also known as Carol. And it was also the inspiration for the movie Carol that came out in 2015. Patricia Highsmith is a mainstay of 20th century lesbian sapphic literature, so I'm really excited to explore her work for the first time. Number 18 on this list is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, which surprisingly I never actually encountered in school. I know it's a common book that is often taught in US schools, and is a classic dystopia centered around book burning and access to information and ideas, which unfortunately is still a really relevant topic today. The next is another classic dystopian, and that is Catch-22 by Joseph Heller. I find it really fascinating that the title of this book has sort of integrated itself into the English language as a saying that sort of means what the scenario of the book is, which is damned if you do, damned if you don't. As far as characters and actual plot points, I really know nothing, and I'll be interested to see how things play out and how they sort of contribute to that, what is now a mainstay, I think, in the English language. Next on the list is one that I am really looking forward to reading around spooky season this year, and that is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Shirley Jackson is, I think, a very well-known modern Gothic writer, and I think this is also categorized sometimes as horror, which I'll be interested to see. I am very much a scaredy cat, but I think I've heard that a good number of people who generally don't really like super scary things could handle this one. But it sounds like we have a possibly haunted house, some paranormal investigation, and the promise of an inheritance based on the summary of this book. Number 21 on this list is a bit of ancient literature, and that is The Bacchae and Other Plays by Euripides. I thought, why not? This is on my shelf. I might as well throw at least one bit of classic, as in classic literature onto this TBR. And looking back, I don't think I've ever actually read fully any ancient Greek plays, which is really surprising to me. My copy includes the 4 plays Ion, The Women of Troy, Helen, and The Bacchae by Euripides. The back of the book says that Euripides' major themes of religious skepticism, the injustices faced by women in the world, and the folly of war are all heavily featured, which sounds great to me. Second to last on this TBR is The Fountain Overflows by Rebecca West. I feel like this is a slightly less well-known classic. I definitely heard Rebecca West's name mentioned in several of my World War I classes as far as writers who wrote about the war afterwards, but I don't think World War I features in this particular book. Instead, this is sort of a fictionalized version of Rebecca West's relatively chaotic and volatile childhood. This sounds like it is a family drama that was published in the 1950s and features a family that is fleeing from ruin and scandal to the suburbs of London, where the father is taking up a new job. Other than that, I don't know much about this book, and I'll be interested to see what it holds. And the 23rd, the last book on this TBR, I feel like had to be a Jane Austen, and I definitely want to read Sense and Sensibility this year. I've read Pride and Prejudice and Northanger Abbey in the past, and definitely wanted to continue my journey of reading Austen, and just decided that I might as well just start from the beginning and work my way through. Would also definitely love to reread the 2 Jane Austen books that I've already read. But that is it, my friends. Those are the 23 classics that I want to read in 2023. Let me know, are any of these also on your list? Are there any additional classics that you are interested in getting to this year? Let me know in the comments. A small reminder that I will be doing a Q&A video at the end of this month in order to celebrate reaching 400 subscribers, so if you would like to leave me a question for that, just pop it down in the comments below. Again, thank you if you have already left me a question. I really appreciate it. And with that, I think I need to wrap up this video and get on with my day, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. That apparently helps. And I will see you in my next video.